protecting people and property for over 60 years. Clarke fire protection products are crafted to meet the quality and performance requirements demanded by the industry. With fire protection, only the best matters. Crafted by Clarke, trust Clarke.
Like and subscribe.
Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into this international version of the Fire Sprinkler Podcast. We are here at FSI in Dublin 2024. It's been a great event, and I'm here with the guys from Clarke Fire Products. Justin, how's it going today?
Yeah.
Right? Great. Oh, we'll go back and forth here.
All right, no problem.
How's everything going? Good?
No, it's really been a good show. This is actually the first time I've come to this event in Europe, and pleasantly surprised. They were saying this is one of the largest turnouts they've ever had, and it's really been a good opportunity to meet a lot of people and go to a lot of conferences. So very, very glad I showed up and participated.
Yeah, absolutely. Ross, you're the local Clarke Fire Products distributor. What's your opinion on the show?
No, indeed, it's been great so far. This is, I think, the 5th version of this show I've came to, and it's grown every year. So I think when I first came in 2018, there was only maybe 150 delegates. It's over 400 this year. Likewise, the expo exhibitors has increased exponentially. So we get a lot of value out of coming here.
Yeah, this is my first time coming to FSI. Wendy invited me last year. I think was it in England last year?
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, yeah, that's right. Last year at Amsterdam, I was trying to get here, but other things come up and I wasn't able to get here. Super happy to come to the first event that I've ever been to in Dublin, and it's been fantastic. So, kind of getting into it, why don't we start off? Tell me a little bit about your history with the company. And then we'll get into the history of the company after I learn a little bit more about you guys.
Okay, well first I'm the Director of Global Sales for Clarke. Embarrassed to say, well, it's been my 33rd year here. So, but I've seen a lot of changes from when we were just a very small company, just doing a few engines a week, and kind of the small guys in the industry versus Caterpillar Corporation and Cummins Corporation. And then we just basically went out and learned in the industry and found where we are. But for me, I've done many different roles, from production line to the websites to being the manager for US and Mexico and expanding, and then finally getting all over the world. So it's been a long, interesting road, and
a wild roller coaster.
Kept me busy. Absolutely.
Ross, what's your involvement with the company, and how long have you been with the company for?
This is my 12th year with the company. It's always been in a kind of a sales function. So my current role is business development manager, and it's a preferred role for myself because I'm allowed to get involved in many aspects of the business. I'm not just kind of pigeonholed into one section. So I've got a lot of close contact with customers, but also suppliers. I work with a lot of our internal staff in every department, and hopefully just bring value to different aspects of the business to make us a better proposition in the market.
Yeah, so now getting into the history a little bit about Clarke Fire Products, how long has Clarke Fire Products been around for? You guys got a pretty significant anniversary coming up?
This is our 60th anniversary, so we will be celebrating that this year. And it's an interesting history. We started out really as a small Detroit diesel distributor, just in Ohio, Indiana, Kentucky, and we would buy and resell to the local pump companies. And then one day Detroit Diesel said, we don't want to make listed diesels anymore. So the pump companies in our area said, why don't you guys do it yourself? So all of a sudden we started doing it, and then since we got the listing for the world, Detroit Diesel said you can sell anywhere you want. So instead of being this little Detroit Diesel distributor in the Midwest, all of a sudden we're selling all around the world. And then, so we went on that road for a while, and then I would say later on, to fast forward around the mid-90s, Detroit Diesel saw emissions and everything coming up, and they said, we're not going to have engines anymore. And so we decided we either go out of business or find something new. So we actually found John Deere is one of the companies. We said, we sell these engines, please give us a great price. I said, sure, try this one and see what happens. We started selling a lot. They said, you're the real deal. We want you to build engines for us. And they helped us develop electronic engines, dual ECMs, to get us where we are. And then slowly and surely over time, we become the expert of, instead of buying and reselling, developing engines specifically for fire protection. And on the same road, I'll let Ross come in here, because we acquired IMD in 1998. He has a little bit more history on the facility in Scotland.
So you guys manufacture here?
Yeah, not here in Ireland, but in Scotland, UK.
Okay.
So, as Justin mentioned,
Keep in mind, I'm North American. When I say here, I mean generally
Europe, or
over
across
the
the
ocean.
Atlantic.
Yeah, that way. Yeah.
So yeah, there was a similar to the how Clarke USA had got established. There was a almost distributor / specialist packaging company called Industrial and Marine Diesel.
Okay.
And they basically distributed Iveco engines. They also got interested in the fire market and became a competitor to Clarke and Cummins and Cat USA. And what was very shrewd by Clarke USA was they could either try to compete with them, or they could do a takeover and bring them into the family. And they opted for the latter. So in 1998 they acquired IMD. It was fully rebranded as Clarke.
Okay.
All the staff remained because they had good product knowledge. But Clarke USA, brought their systems knowledge. They brought additional products, additional financial backing, obviously.
Yep.
And yeah, that was 1998, and it was great. There was a cultural understanding. There was the time zone worked out better than the US. And it really allowed Clarke as a global company to expand on the journey we've been on now for the past 60 years.
So now, being North American based, I understand the North American market. Over here, is it primary diesel pumps going in, or is it primary electric pumps going in? Drivers.
It's a really good question. So Europe as a whole is kind of like a primary diesel market. Diesel is really favoured. Some installations are twin diesel. Many are one electric, one diesel.
Yeah.
But there isn't many twin electric installations. Another thing about Europe that is different to North America is North America really only uses the ULFM, third-party certified standard.
Yep.
Europe, as it is a very diverse, made up of many different states. Every country has its own, believe it or not, fire protection standard.
Yeah, I've noticed.
You'll have seen a lot of the logos at the show. So that's where our business differs from Clarke USA. Whereas, we sell a lot of ULFM, but we also do a lot of customization on what we call the non-listed country code engines.
Okay.
One of the most popular being EN 12845. That's considered the minimum level for fire protection in Europe. But again, each country has its own spin on that, some additional requirements. And that's an area where we specialise, as we are willing to almost do anything our customer needs within reason to meet their requirements for the country.
So as a European distributor who specialises in that, how different are the codes and standards as far as drivers are concerned?
It can be very different. I mean,
really? Okay.
It can be things like different voltage requirements, daft things like different paint colour requirements. It can be different sensors in the engine, different alarms the engine has to have.
No instrument panels. Sometimes some markets don't even have instrument panels.
Really?
Yeah.
So now, when you say different colours, like you don't just get like a big red driver showing up.
Believe it or not, there's different types of red, and some countries are very specific. So
as global, I would assume,
yes.
Yeah, you would know.
Yes.
So it's a small thing, but we're happy to meet their needs. Even things like different language, obviously stickers and instructions. It's important to that end user. If they're not speaking English, which they likely won't in Europe as their first language, we want to try and make the product as close to home as possible for them, so they can easily operate it. Especially in an emergency. But yeah, it can be anything from paint, stickers to instrument panels, cooling systems. There's various preferences, but we take pride in trying to cater to all.
Yeah, absolutely. Making it available, being a global company, being available to everybody globally.
And honestly, way back when, it sounds strange, but it is difficult for a U.S. company to actually sell in Europe without representation. And we're only building ULFM, and then working with Clarke Scotland. Really, we kind of took a lot of their philosophy as well, because now if a country has a specific regulation, we'll build to it. So instead of saying, everything's ULFM and that's it, we will build anything to their needs. And so if someone says, you're selling in Germany, we have a VDS spec, it's going to meet the spec. And we specifically cater to all the needs. And so if there is a regulation around the world, we will build to it. And that's kind of our niche now, really.
So now, when you say building to their need, does it get as specific as a different casting for the body of the driver itself? Are they all similar with maybe different ports or something like that?
Well, there's a country regulation, and then there's also a customer specific specification as well, and they really cater to it. They might even provide a specific sensor for a customer that uses the gauge. We will go to that level, and people don't realize that. So we go around, visit, we ask what people need and what they want, what's unique about their area, and then we just try to design and cater to it. So it's just something we've been doing for years, and it is kind of what makes us a little bit unique.
What are the things like from Clarke Fire Products, like so John Deere is not a driver anymore?
It is.
They still are
Yes.
providing, so now you guys are going head to head?
No, John Deere is our primary provider.
Okay.
And so what also makes us a little bit unique is we're one of 12 companies that actually buys directly from John Deere and works with engineering. We don't work through a distributor. When we switched from Detroit Diesel went up to about 1,200 horsepower. John Deere went up to 617 horsepower, I believe, because you don't need anything larger for a combine.
Right, yeah.
So we were missing a large part of the market, so then we went and found another company called Doosan, which is now Hyundai.
Yep.
And so we use that engine for 200 and about 60 horsepower up to 900 horsepower. And then later on the road, we try to sell a lot of the Doosan engines for like oil and gas projects, but they're like, who's Doosan? What's this? Not meeting emissions. So we kind of got out of the market a little bit. And I guess one of the big changes we had is that we now offer Caterpillar. And this actually happened kind of by mistake, where our vice president at the time was at an NFPA meeting, and he goes in there, he sees CADs, like, what are you guys doing over here? You don't sell anything. He's like, well, you guys sell everything, why don't you use us? He says, are you serious? Are you serious? We started talking, because how do you go to one of the largest corporations in the world that have like 40,000 people, knock on the front door, like, oh, I know you make a list of product, I think we could do a better job. We would never find the right people.
That's a quick conversation to have, potentially, right? Like, you have one of those, did we just become best friends kind of moment?
So that happened around 2019.
Yep.
And since then, probably jumping around from, but
no, that's
the way
right.
we go.
Yeah,
Since then, we've actually started getting more into oil and gas and industrial, because now we have a premium engine, and so we really appreciate it, because before it was we're very, very much commercial, and now for the industrial, we've developed a whole bunch of unique and specialty items, and that in conjunction with Caterpillar, and we're up to about 1,200 horsepower with them, really gives us a full line of products, so we could, and that's why we talk to a lot of governments and other businesses, because we're pretty much neutral. You know, if we have a full line, people talk to us and we just tell them, you know, what they need, rather than say this is the only product we have, and we can, you know, be pretty much unbiased that way.
That's right. Well, you have a lot of options available. If somebody needs something specifically or requests a specific manufacturer, you have the availability to provide it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so getting into, like, with diesel drivers, the big push right now is kind of switching everything over to electric. About 5 minutes ago, Christina from Tesla was here and was kind of giving us a hard time. You know, everybody's here in good nature, ribbing everybody. What kind of environmental changes have you seen happen from 98, from when you guys kind of started coming over here and expanding into fire protection a lot more? What kind of environmental changes and regulations have you seen?
Well, I'll start out in the States. The U.S. really started first, I would say, in the mid-90s, especially California.
Yeah.
They started asking for emissionized engines, and that emissionized engines were basically compliant. It was more like a calculation. Right. Then, all of a sudden, we went to certified, which means it had to come from the manufacturer. So when we get a rating, we had the rating developed with the manufacturer, but we don't touch it, anything to change it, because we want to keep that certification. So in the U.S., we went from essentially a tier 1 to a tier 3. Now this topic is something, it's actually an interesting topic, because a lot of people, they might read the regulations like, oh, I'm looking for Euro 6 or tier 4, and fire protection in the U.S. is limited to tier 3. They actually don't use that language anymore. And the reason for that is, it's the highest emissions you can get without aftermarket equipment.
Okay.
So our product, how it works is, when you run a weekly test, you're only about 30-35% load, and the equipment doesn't get hot enough for a lot of this aftermarket equipment to work.
Right.
In addition, the equipment doesn't have any bypass.
Yeah.
So if you have to run like a particulate trap, you have to run the engine essentially idle until all the particulates are burned off. Well, this could happen during a fire. So even the EPA has recognized this, and if I look at our EPA document, page 28, table 4. Not that I've done this a few times.
Like, it sounds like he's really familiar with it. Could you name any pages?
Not for the US regulations, no.
So
Europe, yeah.
So we have developed a line of emissionized engines, and it's tricky because NFPA requires reliability, redundancy. So it's the only engine in the world that has 2 ECMs. And so at first you could switch one ECM to the other manually, but as of the last, I would say maybe the last 6 years or so, it's auto switching. So we actually look at each ECM. We could tell if it failed. We could give an alarm. We could switch automatically during a fire.
Right.
And so that regulation was kept. And then over in Canada, during COVID, actually, we didn't get a whole lot of notice, but they switched in the middle of the night because they didn't want to develop a new regulation because the market's too small to say, here's my custom regulation. So they piggybacked on what the US EPA was, and they started doing that in around 21. June
The Canadian market
21.
is too small. I'm a little offended, but I'll let it slide.
No, but you're still very happy neighbors. And then I'll pass it on to Ross, because this show we've been talking about emissions and environmental and some of the things they have going on here in Europe.
So how do they differ from everything that just got laid on us there? That was a ton of information. Thank you.
Justin is a library of information,
Absolutely.
an oracle of information.
So how do the environmental concerns differ here in the UK?
So,
Or in Europe?
as Justin mentioned, obviously the US has kind of led the way on our application for emissions control. So, as it stands in Europe just now, there is a directive called the Medium Combustion Plant Directive, or the MCP Directive.
Okay.
And that was basically published in 2015, became legal compliance in 2018. But that basically covers anything that's almost a non-road application, so anything that burns a fuel in an off-road kind of environment technically falls under that guideline. But they put in a logical exemption, and that basically states if an engine or a combustion plant runs less than kind of 500 hours per year on average over 3 years, it can be exempted by the state or the country that is controlling that. And as it stands in 2024, basically every country in the EU opts to exempt, fire protection, because our engines will only run normally 27 hours per year if it's been tested. Sadly, we don't get the level of testing we would want, so a lot of them are running, sub 20 hours. So in the grand scheme of things, in terms of air pollutants, it really is a small number when you compare it to other applications or other items that are combusting fuel. So that's what it is just now. But environmental scrutiny is increasing, and rightly so. Every person and company in the globe has to recognise what they're consuming, what they're not recycling. Their impact to the planet, as we want to sustain it as long as possible. So. We were asked to actually do a presentation at FSI Dublin on sustainability, and that touched on different things. So one, it touched on what I mentioned about the low operation hours. So obviously we're in the environment aspect, you're trying to target the big things or the easy wins. Where's the biggest part of the problem? Let's address that first. And really that is more like on-road vehicles, it's the trucks, all these applications, given fire pumps critical role in operation and its low operating hours. In many ways, it might be the last thing that really has to get tremendous focus and would have to switch over. Now, because there is no legislation for a specific emission level in the EU, there's basically a range of engine emission levels being used. So there's engines that we would class as tier 0 or non-emission controlled. These basically have no official emissions outputs, so there's no knowledge of what the emissions are. There's then Tier 1, or EPA Tier 1 or Euro Stage 1, which is an old, outdated regulation, but there is emissions data for it, so we do understand those pollutants. And we then jump up to the highest level that Justin mentioned, which is the EPA Tier 3 term that's not used now, but that was still the kind of measurement term, and that equates to Euro Stage 3A, which is a common term known in Europe. So Clarke has those engines. So we have the lower regulated engines, but we also have those Euro 3A developed for North America. And part of my presentation highlighted that those are available today in Europe. The reasons people don't select them is various. The big ones likely cost. There's a lot more technology on those engines to control the emissions, to perform in a more modern way. You are looking at maybe 40 to 50% more expensive than one of those old-fashioned mechanical engines. There's less suppliers. We are probably one of the only ones in Europe that could supply those products directly. There's then likely ignorance, so we don't expect everyone in the market to be diesel engine experts. They may only know you have a diesel fire pump and electric. They don't understand that we have these different levels of products. So for us, it's a lot about education. If people want to be more environmentally friendly, reduce their impact, they could switch to those Euro 3A engines, more modern technology, and overnight, or that new installation is going to have less of an impact without compromising safety.
Right.
Moving then away from the engine technology side, especially in Europe, but a little bit in California, there's a lot of development going on with fuels right now. So you've got your traditional petroleum diesel, ASTM D975 number 2 is the traditional one in the US. Here in Europe it's EN590, and in the UK it's BS2869. So these are your petroleum diesels that are oil, extracted from the ground, fractional distillation, and that's what we've been using for almost forever with diesel engines. In more recent times, or if you go back 20 years, people invented biodiesel, taking waste animal fat, waste food products. It's not great for standby. On-road vehicles, it can work. There is still some downsides, but
does it have a short lifespan?
Very short. After 30 days, it's very unstable.
It separates.
Yeah, you're getting,
really?
Yeah, you get a layer of water, and then micro growth, and then that basically clogs all the filters.
Intake,
So it's like, again, people are looking at biodiesel, and some countries mandate it, but again, for bus or anything else, you're using it all the time, it's fine, but with a diesel tank and it can be stored over a period of time, it's really, you're adding risk into it, even though you're trying to be clean.
Yep. Well, especially like when you're, from an NFPA standpoint, you've got to have 8 hours of fuel.
Minimum,
Minimum 8 hours of fuel, and if you're only running the pump for a half hour a week, it's 16 weeks if you don't top it up, right?
Yeah,
right.
Unless you get somebody in there stirring that thing around. So
Exactly. But we do see, one of the things we do see missionized engines spreading, even in some countries that don't have regulations. Like, if we're going to build a foundry in Indonesia, they say, okay, this is a big carbon footprint, and then we get the big specs, and they want to write and measure it. So we do see spreading on the other areas that are unusual. Is generally really a big footprint in a country, and then a lot of the companies might be U.S. or Japanese writing the regulations, and they'll put certain levels in there.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's kind of the way the world's going, is environmentally friendly, especially oil and gas. I'm from Sarnia, Ontario, which is called the Chemical Valley. Imperial Oil, Suncor, Shell, all major employers and refineries in here, and there was a big little turn there for a little while where they were thinking, like, are we going to go so green that this city's going to die off? And it's weathered the storm. There's a lot of work there. There's a lot of expansion going on in Sarnia as well still. But it's just like, I say with Sprinkler all the time, I almost say it in every episode, you evolve with the industry, or the industry's going to evolve without you. And it sounds like Clarke Fire Products has done that pretty damn well for the past 60 years.
Good try. And actually, it's funny you mention that, because really, with the Caterpillar engines, the ones we use are all electronic, and some of the oil and gas is now getting emissionized products, and they really not developed it.
Yeah.
And so that's actually our next big push, that we actually have a listing. We're just waiting for the paperwork. We'll have the first explosion-proof diesel fire pump driver. So we have wiring that meets C1, D2 regulations. We have explosion-proof starters, alternators, engines completely sealed, Type 7 boxes for manual contactors. So
that's huge.
Yeah, we've written.
That's huge, because in oil and gas, like, again, being in Sarnia, we have refineries that they had spec things like flow switches and pressure switches and stuff like that on a sprinkler system. Well, you can get a pressure type flow switch, explosion proof, but Potter didn't have them available. There was a 12-week lead time on an explosion proof water flow, paddle flow. So it's insane to think that you're taking a combustion engine and making it explosion proof.
Yes,
Right?
and honestly, with the people, some people are retiring. A lot of these specs are passed down for 30 years, and they don't know why the spec's written. And we've written all the letters and all the deviations, so we could say, here it is, no deviations, have a nice day. Oil company's not getting ripped off. The engineer stays within boundaries, and we're just, whether they appreciate it or not, we're trying to make their life easier and have something that complies with not only NFPA 20, but also regulations on an oil rig as well.
Talking about specs, especially with me, like, I've been on a tear for the past couple of months as far as specifications are concerned. As an estimator, I get projects in estimating, designing, fitting, everything. I do a little bit of everything. But you get a spec in that says the required sprinklers are Grinnell, or the approved alternative solutions, Star, Globe. All of those companies are gone now.
Yes.
Then all been purchased, right? So, when you say inadequate specifications, like in fire protection, no.
Absolutely.
Right? Can you believe that? So, before we wrap up, I want to thank you guys tremendously, number one, for the opportunity tonight the dinner that we're going to is going to be at the Guinness Storehouse.
Yeah,
So it's
that's
called
right.
the Guinness Storehouse. I was gonna pass on it, but then Wendy reached out and said that you guys were going to invite me and have me as your guest. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. That's going to be super fun.
We thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. I can say that, I've been I'm telling people here now, I'm waiting for somebody to take a swing at me. I've never had a Guinness beer in my life.
Oh my
Well,
gosh.
today's a special day.
I know. Listen.
Maybe we should photograph you taking your first
That's
sip.
it. Like my
We'll
first.
have to do that for you.
I had buddies like, oh, you're going to Guinness. Should we or you're going to Ireland? Should we start having Guinnesses and stuff like that leading up? And I'm like, no. My first Guinness is going to be right from the source.
Yep.
So hopefully it doesn't set a standard that I expect now.
I think you're starting at the top
Right,
for sure.
exactly.
But now I'm not saying I've never had a drink before. Like I am still a sprinkler guy, but it's my first Guinness will be right from the tap. So
Exactly.
Thank you for that opportunity.
No problem.
I appreciate that.
And to quickly jump back to the fuel topic, because there's one final aspect of that. So, as I say, biodiesel was almost the first attempt at a more environmentally friendly fuel for diesel engines. It really doesn't work for fire pump. We can't highlight enough how much we recommend against that. There has been a more recent development. So there's a fuel that's currently being produced and developed called hydrotreated vegetable oil, HVO.
Yep.
It's getting a lot of airtime in Europe. We're seeing a lot of questions about this. So we are reviewing it and we're involving other stakeholders such as our engine companies, UL, FM, LPCB. The fuel itself doesn't have really any of the downsides of biodiesel, with the exception of, again, it might offer slightly lower density per litre, which could then be less engine power. That's our main concern. So we're looking at this closely because it does have a lot of environmental benefits, both its life cycle, CO2 emissions, and also it's as operational, as used in a diesel engine. It's also shown via lab testing to have reduced emissions as well. So it's a very interesting thing. We are not in a position right now to endorse it or permit usage of it. But it's something that is likely going to come, and there likely will be a pathway that we can maintain the safety of the engine, maintain that reliability of a standby diesel, but also again reduce that air pollutant aspect of operating it.
So if somebody like when you're selling a product, when you're selling a driver, do you guys have to specify the fuel type? Like if this becomes prevalent and used around, you're going to have to either have two data sheets, one if you're using a standard diesel fuel, and another if you're using this new product. I didn't catch the whole name of it, but
HVO is the
HVO,
short name.
okay. So are you going to have two different kind of data sheets as far as
that's the kind of journey we're on right now, and that's not necessarily even for Clarke to decide, because we take our advice from the engine OEMs first and foremost. Now, as a fuel, they accept it. It's on all their data sheets. If you've got a tractor, a generator, they're all saying you can use it. There's no warranty impact. They don't see any downsides. It's really specifically for us for fire protection. We sell guaranteed, speed and power. The pump companies size the pumps and the power demands based on our engine. They might not allow much tolerance in there. So if that engine doesn't run at the stated rating that Clarke have, that's got repercussions. So that's why we've been very cautious. As you say, it could go down a route that when you're designing from day one, you might have to understand the fuel and take different sizing decisions. Or there could just be a D-rate percentage that's agreed upon that covers you in the worst case scenario. So, as I say, it's very interesting for us. It's interesting for the industry, for the environment. So, Clarke's trying to work with the concept, but do it in the right way to mitigate the risk, while obviously in the long term, hopefully delivering the benefit to everyone.
Absolutely. Well, that was a good thing to throw in at the end there. Like we talked about all this environmental stuff, and then that could be a potentially major change, depending on what that percentage is in reduced power. Right. Especially if something as interchangeable as fuel. You have standard diesel one time, and then this guy goes and buys the new type.
One thing I would say is, if there's something comes around, what we do is, on our website we actually have a lot of calculators. Just really briefly, NFPA 20, when we guarantee horsepower, we guarantee it at 91.4 meters, 25 degrees C. And whether it's us or Caterpillar or Cummins, that's where we guarantee it with using number 2 diesel. So we have a D rate for altitudes, 3% for every 300 meters above 91.4, and 1% for every 5.6 degrees Celsius above 25. But if we were to use another fuel, since it has less power density, I would say down the road, we'd probably say, if you have this other fuel, you have to take another 5% D rate. We would make it easy as possible, but we have to have, I always see the baseline being the same with number 2 diesel, almost at sea level, an average temperature, and then you would just have probably another D rate chart depending on what the fuel is. So we try to make things that seem a little complicated as easy as possible. Make it.
That's the industry. Try to take an overly complicated thing and make it as easy as possible for everybody.
Yeah, make it consistent and make it reliable.
Yeah, awesome. Great conversation. Nice to meet you. Thank you again. I really appreciate all the support, guys.
No problem.
Thanks.
Thank you.
See ya.